Okay, that brings us to item 14, discussion. We'll start with item A, land acknowledgement statements. Superintendent?
Yes, this item is being brought back to the board as a request that came to our staff at the January 18th meeting. And again, I want to acknowledge our partners from Native American Parent Advisory Committee and Dr. Peace, who've been working together with our curriculum instruction team to look at land acknowledgement statements. And the reason we're looking at that is to honor the Indigenous people and as the traditional stewards of the land and acknowledge the enduring relationship between them and their traditional territories. So we had a draft of our statement and we shared it at our last NAPAC community meeting or advisory meeting and got some feedback, and Dr. Peace has a revised statement she'd like to share tonight.
Yes. Good evening, President Hui, Dr. Kaligian and the board. Excuse my voice this evening. I'm excited to be here to discuss the land acknowledgement. This has been a work in progress for about 3 years. So I'm really grateful for the partnership from our NAPAC friends, and I look forward to this work. So as Dr. Kaligian shared, we had a draft, we shared it with our NAPAC partners and received some feedback, and we are honoring and respecting their feedback. And so I'm going to read the land acknowledgement that they have shared with us. And to our friends, if I butcher tribal names, please charge it to my head and not my heart. I apologize in advance. As the Folsom Cordova Unified School District, we acknowledge that our administrative facilities and schools occupy the unceded territory of the Miwok, the original people of the skies, land, and waters, where we work and learn. We also recognize the presence and ancestral stewardship of the Nisenan ancestral tribes, the Isto, Natomas, and Nissim Paiwanan to the north, and the Miwok ancestral tribes, the Amakan, Consumne, Holopin, and Mokilam of the south, along the great Sacramento River system since time immemorable. We understand that this land upon which our institutions are built was once flourishing with natural resources and sustained by the ancestral knowledge and practices of these indigenous communities. We acknowledge the injustices of colonialism and attempted genocide that have impacted these communities and recognize the resilience of these descendants who continue to thrive today. In our daily endeavors of teaching, learning, leadership, and community engagement, we commit to supporting the evolving vision of the Miwok and Nisenan communities for their lands and people. We seek to learn from and collaborate with our tribal partners, including the Wilton Rancheria, who are the descendants of the original people of this land. As the only federally recognized tribe in Sacramento County, Wilton Rancheria welcomes our acknowledgement and collaboration. We pledge to respect and honor the culture, traditions, lifeways of Indigenous peoples as we work together for the recognition and betterment of our communities and all future generations. And this is drafted and approved by the Native American Parent Advisory Committee.
Thank you. All right.
Any questions?
Questions from the board?
No questions. I just wanted to comment and say thank you. I know that this has been a very long time coming. Equity team started this when you started. So I'm really glad that the collaboration happened. I love the new draft. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peace. And I just want to say thank you to NAPAC. You guys worked really hard on this. So congratulations, and let's make this happen.
Any other questions?
I do have, I guess, some thoughts. What exactly are we going to do, or do we plan on doing with this land use statement?
My intention is to have it posted in our lobby. We conducted an equity walkthrough tool 2 years ago with students, parents, employees to take assessment of our own building. We've asked sites to do that very thing, and so to model our own statements and beliefs, we did the same equity walkthrough tool in our building, and we scored very low. And so because of that, you may notice some of the changes that have taken place in the lobby. And a land acknowledgement was one of the things that the committee recommended to add to our beautiful map that's in the front, as well as recognizing the diversity in the linguistic diversity of our district, recognizing that we have over 80 languages and identifying our school sites. And so the intention is to place it in the lobby as well as have it read at every board meeting at the beginning.
Yeah, I guess I don't have a problem with, acknowledging in some form, whether it's in a lobby or some type of, recognition, but to have it read before every single board meeting, I do have a concern with that, for several reasons. And one of them actually was fairly articulated by the Atlantic magazine. In 2021, they published an article on this, and the Atlantic is not a conservative, it's not a liberal, it's pretty much a neutral magazine. They got into an article, it was entitled "Land Acknowledgements Are Just Moral Exhibitionism." Essentially what they're saying is that they are things there are statements that are made for political purposes, essentially. And they really accomplish nothing. And actually, maybe I'll read the first couple or two paragraphs of the article. It reads, in David Manette's film State of Maine, a Hollywood big shot tries to shortchange a set hand by offering him an associate producer credit on a movie. A screenwriter overhears the exchange and asks, "What's an associate producer credit?" The big shot answers, "It's just what you give a secretary instead of a raise." The practice of land acknowledgement preceding a fancy event by name, such as school board. I guess if we're fancy, I guess I'm fancy today, so therefore I guess it's appropriate. So anyway, the practice of a land acknowledgement preceding a fancy event by naming the indigenous groups whose slaughter and dispossession cleared the land on which the audiences are about to be served is one of the greatest associate producer credits of all time. A land acknowledgement is what you give when you have no intention of giving the land. It is like a receipt provided by a highway robber, noting all the jewels and gold coins that have been stolen. Nothing, or maybe it may be useful for an insurance claim. Anyway, you are not getting your jewels back, but you have documentation. I mean, essentially, that's what we're doing here. We're acknowledging something that we teach in history class. It's something that we teach, that we recognize through cultural events. It's something that we all know to be the fact that Indian lands were dispossessed. But what exactly are we doing? Are we just simply reading a statement for the sake of reading a statement? If we meant something, if this was something that was meaningful to us, something that we truly believed in, then we would be doing something more than just simply reading a statement. We would be saying something along the lines that all FCUSD property that we own currently, that when it no longer ceases to be FCUSD property, we will give it back to the Miwok Indians. But we're not saying that. We're saying that we're creating this statement for, I'm not really sure what purpose. I think it's political, if truth be told, because the only entities that have adopted this statement are Democratic, liberal-leaning entities. There is not a single Republican entity or Republican, I guess, city council, state, or whatever that has adopted this language. It is solely a political statement. Now, we have a board policy that prohibits the employees, the students, the schools, the school board from engaging in political events. We're supposed to be neutral. We're not supposed to take any position. So basically what we have before the board right now is basically a request to make a political statement on something that we all acknowledge happened in the history. It's taught in our history classes. For what purpose? If the purpose is to give the FCUSD land back to the Miwok Indians, I'm all for that. I will vote yes. If the statement is just to make a statement, then I am 100% opposed to this because it's just simply political messaging which violates our board policy on politics.
And Mr. Reed, I would like to
Those are my thoughts.
address your concerns. Respectfully, The Atlantic is not a scholarly publisher. It's not a scholarly journal, and we have lived experience, and we've partnered with those who have the lived experience of Indigenous people. So respectfully, their lived experience supersedes any article that is available on the internet. That's
true, and I would say that I have read, because I did a lot of research on this. There were a lot of Indians and Native Americans who were actually opposed to these statements as well. They felt that it was offensive.
And our NAPAC partners disagree with that statement and have made the request for this land acknowledgement to be in place.
Having someone rob your house and write an apology note and indicate that, I'm sorry, I robbed your house. I took the following items, and that being, and that's it. And that's essentially the equivalent. And again, I didn't come up with that example. That was an article a separate article, not the Atlantic, that was written by a Native American.
Well, teaching factual history is not a political statement. And our intentions here is in partnership with our NAPAC partners who are of Indigenous descent. This has been their request. They have the lived experiences, and as an organization, I believe we have an obligation to respect, value, and honor the lived experiences of our diverse community.
Well, I appreciate that, but I personally find it a very political statement that we're about to do. And if adopted, I will not join the school board meeting until after the statement is read. I feel that strongly that we are entering a point of view that is incredibly political, which violates a board policy. It's something that we all recognize that has happened. I mean, are we recognizing the fact? Why not a statement that we have dispossessed the Japanese population during World War II from their property? And by the way, there were Japanese Americans that were located in Sacramento County. Why not read a statement about that?
We are focusing
Why not
on
read
our
a statement at the same time about the crimes and horrible atrocities related to slavery? Why not read? I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Why are we making one statement and not making a statement about something else? Why not a statement about the Trail of Tears by, Andrew Jackson, the founder of the Democratic Party? Why don't we make that statement? I mean, again, what are we doing here? Our focus needs to be singularly on the education of our students. That is what the school district is here for. It's to educate students. That is our mission. That is our responsibility. Our responsibility is not to engage in politics. This is simply stated politics. That is not our responsibility. That is not the role and mission of the Folsom Cordova Unified School District. I have a significant problem with this statement being read.
All right, thank you, Mr. Reed. I'm going to bring it back to the board here, see if there are any other questions. We're taking comments right now too, I imagine.
Go ahead.
Mr. Merrill.
the first land acknowledgement that I heard was actually this school year. It was the first period I had of my biology class, which is arguably the least political class that you could have. And it was a land acknowledgement, and it was, acknowledging, it was the same one we had here, is acknowledging the tribes that were on this land before us. And although I do agree with Mr. Reed that it's not all that we should do is just have a land acknowledgement, but it should be a base on that we build from. We have the land acknowledgement, and we just passed a grant like 30 minutes ago for those title dollars, right? Yeah, okay.
That's
So we just Title VI dollars. We just passed a grant for the that stuff. So, and that relates to this land acknowledgement. We're building a base from this. This isn't all we should do. I think we should continue off of this, but I mean, it provides the platform and the foundation that we need, and it does educate students like me. Before my biology class, I didn't know what tribes were on this land, and my biology teacher, she told me in the land acknowledgement, and that now I know. And I was reminded again by this land acknowledgement. I think it does educate people about, what it's re-educating us. I believe that everyone here has had different education on the Native Americans than I have. Seeming you guys went to elementary school a long time before I did.
Hey, watch it.
Our curriculums are very different, and my curriculum is different than what elementary schools are now. So I think a more modern version of this and, continually updating it is a good thing for the district.
Ms. Lattes.
So I think that creating it into a political statement at this meeting, which was just done by comments, does create it into a political statement with no intention at the beginning of that. So I think that land acknowledgements, one, help build a relationship and collaboration with our community members who have lived experiences. And while it is no justification and no answer to what has been done, we are on their land, and we are built on their land, and we use their land to educate our students. And hopefully we continue to educate them better than we have been educated in the past. And so I think it is the beginning. I think that more and more and more often you will start to hear land acknowledgements in all settings. I attend many events in which land acknowledgements are the base of those events. And none of which are political. So I think that moving beyond being equitable and moving into this avenue of being anti-racist and truly acknowledging some of our downfalls in equity in our building, but also in our actions. And so we start every board meeting with a flag salute, and not everybody in the room wants to do that. And not everybody stands with that, and not everybody says it as we say it. And that's fine. That can be a statement anybody has the right to choose to do. And so I think that we are at a pinnacle in our district. We have been working very, very, very hard to get to a point where we are starting to put kind of our new knowledge and our basis of collective knowledge into practice. And I think that this is moving that very first practice. Land acknowledgements are not a new thing. They're centuries old. And so this is putting into practice something that can continue to build relationships with our community, with our marginalized community. And that is really where we start to grow and get better and do better. And so I think when we know better, we do better, and we have to live by that. That's what we want our kids to do. We want our kids to know where we are, whose land this is, what they've done for the land in the past. Our area is based very much on Native American history, and we have salmon that go up and down the river every year that large communities depended on and helped shape that path for this land. And so I think that by calling it out as a political statement when there is no politics behind this, is now going to create it into a political situation, and that's really unfortunate, rather than looking at it at face value of what it actually is and what it actually will do.
Just really quick question. What is our intention as far as, with acknowledging these tribes? Do we have intention of really highlighting their contributions, especially like at our elementary school levels and, having that kind of curriculum? Like, are we going to be pairing that kind of with this, or what's kind of the next steps past this?
Yes, great question. So we already have our recognition months, and Native American Heritage Month is recognized. We will be partnering with NAPAC. They wish for us to have a powwow at the district office. They wish for us to have a Native American graduation. And so it is my intention to honor those requests.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, also some words. As Ms. Lofthouse said, this practice is nothing new. It's nothing novel. Actually, it has spanned decades and decades. It is a very well-known practice. It's something that's not recent, but I'm glad that this district is taking the right steps. And this won't be the final actions that this district should take, but is the first steps in the right direction. And the reasoning behind, I want to read an article from the National Museum of the American Indian, which is a reputable source backed by Native American contributions, that land acknowledgements are used by Native peoples and non-natives to recognize indigenous peoples who are the original stewards of the lands which we now live. This is a simple recognition. It is not an action, it's a statement, a simple recognition. It should not have any politics associated with it. And I think that if we are prohibiting it from being read during these meetings, we're setting a really dangerous precedent for our students. And we're essentially restricting what they can and cannot learn about, in a sense. And it would be such a shame for this district to celebrate equity and the diversity in this district with our various recognition months, International Night, yet we refuse to read this statement at our board meetings. I think that's very contradictory, and it's almost hypocritical that we are celebrating the diversity of our students, yet we refuse to acknowledge this statement at all. So it is imperative that we just include this statement. As Ms. Lofthouse said, it's like a flag salute. You don't have to necessarily personally agree with that statement, but I think it should be read and recognized.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Again, I guess my question for my colleagues is, why hasn't any Republican entity adopted this statement? It is a statement that has only been adopted by Democratic jurisdictions. So I don't know how you can say it's not a political statement. But again, I am willing to vote for this statement if the board and my colleagues are willing to cede all land that is currently FCUSD in trust to the Native American Miwok tribe. If you're willing to do that, I will vote for this. But if it's just simply a statement for statement purposes, I have no idea what we're doing, wasting, quite frankly, our time reading a meaningless statement. So either let's put our money where our words are, or let's not go down this path.
Yeah, I have a few comments. And Ms. Reed, I hear where you're coming from. I think Mr. Mildred, you said this shouldn't have politics related to it. I think, unfortunately, the fact is that it does. I don't disagree that it shouldn't. But I think Ms. Reed does have some point here that whether we want it to or not, this statement is polarizing for some people. Not everybody, but certainly for some people. We have to be careful about that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but I do want to acknowledge, Ms. Reed, I think you have a point there. I guess I continue to think, and I agree with the statement. Actually, reading through it, I don't think there's anything all that polarizing in it personally. I agree with everything that's in it. I'd be more than happy to have it posted. And I think maybe reading it periodically would make a lot of sense. I don't know that reading it every board meeting would make the statement itself more meaningful or make it more meaningful to the people that we're hoping it will be meaningful to. In fact, I would say I got up and led the Pledge of Allegiance today. All those words went through my brain and my mouth, and I didn't think about what one word meant tonight. So I actually think maybe making it a regular part of it might take away from some of what we actually want this to mean. But maybe having some regular times where we are acknowledging during the months that we are recognizing Native Americans, maybe some other important times would be good. To me, it's much more meaningful that we just passed or did this public hearing on Title VI. It's much more meaningful that we're in classrooms teaching about Native Americans. To me, that's where the power is. It's not necessarily in this board reading a statement. That's important. We are people of power. We have to acknowledge that, and reading a statement is a good thing. I would not necessarily be in favor of making it a regular part of our board meetings. But I do think we ought to keep pushing in and understanding what are we doing in our classrooms to teach this. I actually was talking with a friend of mine who's a historian, educated as a historian, and is a pretty left-leaning liberal. And I brought this up to him when we first started talking about it. And his point was exactly that. The statement itself is not that important. Doing the work in the classrooms, educating students, that's the work we need to make sure and put our energy into. I don't think these two things are necessary. We can still put our energy into that if we read the statement, but to me, that's the focus. So at least for me, as I stand on this tonight, I do think we should post it on the map. I think we absolutely should read it. I'd be happy to talk about doing a resolution about this statement. I'm not tonight in favor of making this every board meeting reading that we do, but finding ways to acknowledge it in meaningful times during the school year to acknowledge this and read the statement, I would be very happy to do.
Could I
Mr. President, one thing that I would be supportive of is if we wanted to read it during school board meetings during Native American Month, I'd be 100% supportive of that. Again, it's in context and not just something that we're just simply saying for the sake of saying. So that's just, again, my point of view. Thank you.
I would love to communicate and maybe find out from our community members what their thoughts are on us reading this in a regular time. Me personally, I think that only reading it during Native American Heritage Month is kind of doing exactly what we've always done. And we always are on this land. It's not just in the month of November. And so I think that just the same, it goes the same for all of our recognition months. And we need to move beyond just putting things on a calendar and saying and acknowledging it in that month. So I would love to know just kind of the thoughts on how regular it should be read, or just kind of the practice and what our community group would like to say about that.
I want to take it to public comment as well, and then maybe we can come back and finish the discussion. Christy, do you have something? Sorry. Okay. I don't have any in-person public comment. I know we had one hand raised online. Gail, you said? Gail.
Yes.
Yeah, welcome.
Yes, hi, thank you. Thank you very much to the board. And I will say that I'm happy to do whatever makes our Native American community members feel better or feel honored or feel acknowledged. I think that that's always the right choice. I will say to Mr. Reed that I didn't think of it as a political statement, and the only person's politics that I feel that I've learned about tonight are yours. So the vitriolic way that you came across, it was very aggressive and unfortunate, in my opinion. I think that when you have community leaders from a particular group, it's best to come with deference and come with gratitude, because as Ms. Lofthouse mentioned, we are on their land all the time, every day, all day long. Maybe every meeting is too much. Maybe once a month would be more appropriate. Maybe having this posted in every school would be appropriate. I'm not sure about what is appropriate, but I do think that you should defer to the community that is requesting this, because it is their community and not yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, I want to bring it back to the board for, this is a discussion item. So, and, you know, part of the discussion for me is where do we want to bring this and how do we want to bring it back to the staff if it's coming back to us at our next meeting? It's.
Yeah, Mr. President,
Yeah, Mr. Reed.
again, I am more than willing to vote to cede our land to the Native Americans. This is not political. What we're being presented with is political. So are we doing this for the sake of what? Or just to make a statement, a meaningless, entirely meaningless statement? Or are we going to put our words where our mouths are? I will be the first person. I will actually request that the board put forth a motion to cede our land at the point that our land is no longer being used for educational purposes to the Native American Indians. If my colleagues are willing to go along with me, I am 100% for this. If the purpose is just simply to make a statement for statement purposes, again, how is this political given the fact that every single jurisdiction that has adopted this is a democratic jurisdiction? I don't think I'm the one who's being political here. I think it's pretty clear who's being political. And again, we have a board policy against engaging in politics within the district. And you know, again, this seems to be in direct violation of that policy. So, you know, if the desire is to create maybe a plaque that we put at each school district or at each school site, I could probably be okay with that. If the desire is to have a memorial built somewhere on school land, a monument or something to that respect, reflecting on Native Americans, and I'd be supportive of that. If the goal is just to simply read a meaningless statement before every single school board meeting, that's political. And I'd be 100% opposed to that. In fact, not only opposed to that, I think it violates our board policy. And if that's what we want to do, we should amend our board policy to allow politics to be spoken within our schools.
So I want to thank you, Mr. Reed. Bring it back to partly to try to understand if how we would want to bring this forward if we do want to bring it forward.
And I did want to make a
Yes.
comment to President Hui. I hear what Mr. Reed is saying, but our board also passed a policy on equity and the implementation of equity in our schools. And we do read our equity questions. We have them in front of us, you know, in every meeting that we have, and we heard them presented tonight in Oak Chan's presentation. The purpose of bringing up our equity policy and how we're trying to live that on a regular basis and keep it in front of all of us as educators and for our students as well is to honor the diversity of all of our students in the district. And there's a lot of different ways that we do that. And we're going to continue to find new ways to honor that diversity. I'm very excited about the relationship, the new relationship we have with the NAPAC and being able to offer additional support and resources to some of our students that we've not outreached to before. Isn't that what our equity policy is about? We want all students and our families to feel connected, to learn not only more about their culture in a setting with their peers, but for all students, for all 21,000 students to have that experience. I think that's what our equity policy is about, is broadening all of our horizons to be able to do that. And it means that we have to take that leap of faith of saying, you know, we have to open ourselves up to, you know, thinking outside of the box sometimes of how we've done things. And I believe we're a cutting edge district in so many ways, and we're creative and we find ways of, you know, we are not doing things the way that we think we should. We make those amendments and we move forward with that. I think with the recommendation for the land acknowledgement statement, I think this is a discussion item tonight. We can come forward with some of the different recommendations that have been brought forward of how we can celebrate and recognize this, whether, it's at a school site, at the district, but also how it's, how we bring that to life in our classrooms, not only in November, but throughout the year as well. So I would like to ask the board if you'll allow us to come back with some of those recommendations when we bring it back as action at the next meeting.
Can I just follow up with a quick question about when your next meeting is with?
With NAPAC?
Do we have another meeting, Dr. Huber, with NAPAC? Or Ms. Cabrera? Because I know we... But we don't have to wait for a formal meeting. We can, they have been very gracious to
we're in
reach out.
consultation regularly for a variety of reasons, particularly the next phase, which is part 2 of the Title VI Indian
Right.
Education Grant. So as far as a formal meeting to discuss this particular topic, we will set one, but we are in regular communication on an ongoing basis. Yeah.
And yeah, Dr. Cleveland, I appreciate the comments and suggestion. I think that is probably where it makes sense to go. I want to leave a little bit more space for comments and then maybe try to wrap up at least where I've heard that we do have some consensus where I'd want to bring us forward and other questions that we'd maybe want the district staff to answer before, when you do bring it back. Ms. Laird, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just to our public comment, if we could maybe think about putting them at the sites, because I think something that's going to be something regularly that our families will see, because saying at a meeting here with this many people or the people that are online, how impactful is that comparative to, and I'm not saying that I'm not willing to support, talking about it here or, reading it here, but I think that really where the impact would really be more on the school sites where our families and our students are there constantly seeing that and being reminded of that, and, building off of that. So if we could really, when we bring back our options, if we could really look at what that we could do at the sites, I think that would be very helpful, just so that's that constant reminder, when you're on campus. So.
I agree. Just looking at head nods, it looks like that is something that most of us agree with. And Mr. Reed, I don't mean to speak for you, but I think you also mentioned, that you'd be open certainly to having us posted somewhere, like at the ESC or at a school site. So I would say,
Yeah, 100%.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, just really kind of probably echoing what Ms. Laird just mentioned. As it does come back, I think certainly there's consensus on the board that we do want this statement posted and out there. I absolutely agree, not just here. I think it would be great to have that at all the school sites, and if we need to change the language because of the specific site and the different tribes that were there, I'm not sure, but we can have that discussion. I also then would like to say, if there are some suggestions around what would make sense at the board meeting, I do think there's a lot of value in having it read, maybe quarterly or maybe annually at least. Again, personally, every meeting to me doesn't make as much sense, but if there are maybe some recommendations or a calendar for that the district staff would bring back, I think that could be really helpful. Is there anything else any board members would want to see as this does come back to us? And actually, I have one more question. Is there any reason we wouldn't want this to come back as an action item, at least to vote to approve that we, assuming we all want to do that this becomes something that we do post on our sites, and then we can have the discussion around how often we'd like this read out loud at a board meeting?
I think I'd love all of the information to come back at the same time in terms of recommendations, to be able to make the appropriate decision kind of based on what our community members think is appropriate. But I do want to reiterate that it hurt to have a colleague call this out as a meaningless statement. And so I want to openly acknowledge that was said, and I want to openly make known that I don't think that is how the board as a whole or the district feels, but that choice of language was probably not the best. And it hurt me to hear it. And so if it was if it was to somebody deeply connected to this work or to those words, I just want to acknowledge that it was said, and I don't think it was appropriate. So
Well, I will double down and say it was appropriate. It is a meaningless statement. If we want to give the land that we possess back to the Native Americans, let's do that. I have said I will 100% support that. But let's not just make a statement for statement purposes. It's political. Let's call it what it is. It's a political statement.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Lofthouse. Thank you, Mr. Reed. So Superintendent and Ms. Lofthouse, I agree that makes sense to get all the information and bring it back. So I'm on board with that. It seems like the rest of us are. That seems like enough direction moving forward. Okay. So that is just discussion items. So we'll move on to item B, the Safety Advisory Committee update.
Yes, this item is also coming back to the board from a request from.
Thank you so much. On to item 16, board member reports. We'll start with our student board members. Mr. Melchior.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the Folsom Cordova Unified School District, we acknowledge that the administrative facilities and schools occupy the unceded territory of the Miwok, the original people of the skies, land, and waters where we work and learn. We also recognize the presence and ancestral stewardship of the Nisenan ancestral tribes, the Esto, Notomus, Nisim, Pawenan to the north, and the Miwok ancestral tribes, the Amachume, Consumne, Holpumne, and Mokelumne to the south, along with the great Sacramento River systems since time immemorial. We recognize and understand that this land, upon which our institutions are built, was once flourishing with natural resources and sustained by the ancestral knowledge and practices of these indigenous communities. We acknowledge the injustices and colonialism and attempted genocide that have impacted these communities and recognize the resilience of their descendants who continue to thrive today. In our daily endeavors of teaching, learning, leadership, and community engagement, we commit to supporting the evolving vision of the Miwok and Nisenan communities for their land and people. We seek to learn and collaborate with their tribal partners, including the Wilson Rancheria, who are the descendants of the original people of this land. As the only federally recognized tribe in Sacramento County, Wilson Rancheria welcomes our acknowledgement and collaboration. We pledge to respect and honor the cultures, traditions, and lifeways of this indigenous peoples as we work together for the recognition and betterment of our communities and all future generations. And I just wanted to read it again and recognize that this is an inherent struggle that many of these communities face, and it's important that we recognize this. Equity is not political. As Dr. Kaligian said, this is a statement of equity. It's not red, it's not blue, it's equity. And the reason that we're implementing this statement is that we want to acknowledge our past, rectify the present, and ensure that our futures as FCUSD students, faculty, and staff is ensured. And we want to ensure that this history isn't erased and that it is highlighted as it is an important component of this district and our peoples across this district as well as our nation. And it's important that we bring also up racial equity, as many people have brought up that this is an ongoing struggle that does not fade away with the recognition of certain months. It's an ongoing struggle that should be highlighted day after day. Thank you.
Mr. Merrill.
You know, Matthew really took the words out of my mouth. Just imagine everything he said, I'm gonna say, but in order to save time, yeah.
I would also like to just briefly kind of remind our board that while we do have an anti-political board policy, we also have an anti-discrimination board policy. And so I do want to make sure that when things come forward to us, whether we agree or disagree, we aren't making statements that could be discriminatory towards anybody in our community, in the room. And so just keeping those two things in mind, because those two things can kind of clash. And so I just want to make sure that we are ensuring that we are following both policies.
Thank you. Mr. Reed. You're on mute. This time for real.
Yeah. All right, there we go. All right, well, I want to start by recognizing the crimes that were committed against European Americans who came to the New World and were persecuted by the European nations for their religious intolerance that existed, and they had to come to the New World to escape from that. I'd also like to recognize the crimes that were committed against the Black Americans who came from Africa against their will and were enslaved. I think that is worthy of recognition and significant apology that we should all express at every possible occasion. I also would like to apologize or recognize the crimes that were committed against the American Indians. Obviously, they had inhabited this continent for millennia prior to the arrival of the European Americans, and they were treated very poorly. I also like to recognize the crimes that were committed by President Andrew Jackson prior to actually, while he was president, and the crimes that the Trail of Tears that he committed against the indigenous people and the slaughter of them across this country and moving them against their will to territories and land across the country to inhabit on reservations. That definitely needs to be recognized. I'd like to apologize and recognize the crimes of the southern states that took place at the start of our great nation when they adopted a constitution that had recognized slavery. That should never have happened. And, you know, I obviously want to recognize and condemn the Civil War and the atrocities that took place during the Civil War. I also want to apologize and recognize the crimes that were committed against Black Americans after the Civil War in the Jim Crow laws and the voting prohibitions that were adopted because that should never have happened, and that needs to be recognized. I also want to apologize and to recognize the Japanese Americans who were interred by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who were displaced from their lands. Their lands were taken from them, and they were put in camps. Even though they were Americans, they were put in camps against their will, just because their heritage were of Japanese descent. That should never have taken place. I want to apologize and recognize all of the crimes that took place against the African Americans, the Black Americans that took place during the Civil Rights era. Obviously, none of that should have taken place either. It was despicable, and I think we need to recognize that. I want to also, recognize all of the crimes that took place against individuals who are of LGBTQ. Obviously, none of that should have, that intolerance should have never taken place. I think we need to recognize that. It's very important. I also want to recognize our board policy that prohibits political activities. While I guess some of my colleagues perhaps see certain things as being political and not political, clearly there are things that are political and not political. Maybe it aligns with their politics and therefore it's not political, but the fact of the matter is it is in fact political. If we expect and hold our teachers to a certain level of expectation on politics, we certainly need to hold the board to the same level of criteria on politics as well. So that's all I wanted to share tonight. So thank you.
Mr. Clark.
That's going to be a hard act to follow.